Welcome to this special event, Research in Your Backyard. I'm Renee Miller. I'm the Program Director at the Oregon Bioscience Incubator and OTRADI, and we're super glad to have you with us today. This is just a very special event to have on our site and also be live streamed on Zoom. And I just wanted to give a special thank you to the team here at the OBI. We have Heather Ellis, our Executive Director, Hazel Valdez, our Associate Director. We've got Sarah Vivian, our Administrative Assistant, and Susan Thompson, our Office Manager, is not with us today. And I also want to give special thank you to Pharma and for helping organize this event, and Ramsey for all the great background work that you've done, and Rebecca as well. So thank you, everybody. So I want to also give a special shout out. We have two Oregon State Senators with us today. We have Senator Kate Lieber. Thank you for coming. And we have Senator Tim Knopp. And I'm going to introduce him so he can make some remarks. Before that, I just want to give a quick overview as to how this program will go. Senator Knopp will make his remarks, and then we will have a panel discussion with our wonderful panel behind us, who I will introduce in just a moment. And we'll also take some audience Q&A that are joining us on Zoom, and the audience that's joining us in person. So with that, I would like to introduce Senator Tim Knopp represents the citizens of Senate District 27 in Central Oregon, which includes Bend, Redmond, Tumalo, and Sun River. We appreciate you for traveling to Portland to be here with us today and give your remarks. So please.
Thank you, Renee, and all. I appreciate it. Good morning. I am very happy to join you both in person and, of course, those who are with us virtually to mark International Clinical Trials Day at our very own Oregon Bioscience Incubator for a panel discussion titled Research in Our Backyard, Developing Cures, Creating Jobs in Oregon. Today, a new research in Your Backyard report was released, and it reveals Oregon is home to more than 650 active clinical trials, with nearly 9,000 Oregonians participating, creating thousands of jobs and more than $450 million in economic impact to the state. Today, we'll hear from Oregonians who make all that possible, including the Oregon Bioscience Incubator clinical researcher, patient, and biopharmaceutical industry, and explain everything that goes into developing treatments and cures for local patients and the important work happening in Oregon. It's so encouraging to hear that Oregon's been home to more than 5,000 clinical trials since 2004, investigating some of Oregon's biggest health care challenges, including asthma, arthritis, cancer, and infectious diseases. And in fact, my dad was one of those people that went through a clinical trial a few years ago for wild-type melanoma cancer. And he had stage 4 cancer and was going to be deemed terminal. And through that clinical trial, it saved his life. And so he is still with us today because of that. And so this is very personal for me. And knowing that some of the great innovation is happening right here in Portland is such a reminder of the role that we can all play in ensuring a healthier tomorrow for all patients. The biopharmaceutical industry, from the small startups here to the larger manufacturers we all know, bring profound value to patients through new treatments and cures for society's most devastating and costly diseases and conditions, providing millions of patients with treatment options that they would not otherwise have. Their efforts to help develop cures and treatments are changing the lives of Oregon patients for the better. And as I mentioned, my dad, I also should mention I have diabetes, and so I am also a pharmaceutical patient. And so look forward to the cure so I can imbibe in all kinds of sugar that I tend to want. So thank you to the Oregon Bioscience Incubator, the Oregon Alliance of Clinical Researchers, Fighting Lupus, and of course Pharma for inviting all of us to join them in today's conversation. I'm proud to support this work for all of Oregon's bioscientists and clinical researchers and the thousands of jobs this industry brings to our state. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to Renee Miller, who will moderate the panel and introduce our panel and the organization. So thanks so much.
Thank you. I'm going to roll this out of the way so we can see our panel. Okay, let's get started. First, I would like to introduce our wonderful panel today. This is Emmanuel Akporier. He is the founder and CEO of Viana Therapeutics, which is an OBI client company. Welcome.
Good to be here.
And next we have Circe Craighead. She is a patient and an active member of Kaleidoscope Fighting Lupus. I wanted to make sure I said that correctly. Yes, she's an advocate. An honor to be here. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Next, we have Kurt Heiding. He's the president of Synergy Research and an active member of the Oregon Alliance of Clinical Researchers.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming. And last but not least, from the East Coast, we have Reed Porter. He's a senior director of state public affairs at Pharma. So thank you all for joining us today. I'm just really excited about this discussion. So let's get started. The first question goes to Kurt. Tell us, what exactly is a clinical trial and how are they conducted? So basically give us a quick clinical trials 101.
Well, clinical trials are kind of the foundation of how we bring new medications and devices to market. And it's a process where we are treating and collecting data on the human population to determine efficacy and safety measures. In many cases, we will actually look at a compound and try to determine if that particular compound is possibly more efficacious and has a more favorable side effect profile than current medications on the market. This is the process of how these new medications and drugs come to market. And it's vital that we have this type of research constantly evolving to support our population.
Great. If anyone else has anything to add when I ask these questions, feel free to jump in.
If I also may just add to what Father says, you have at least 3 phases of clinical trial. The phase 1 is a small trial where you're looking for safety in the patient. Is the drug harmful? If it's not, you can go to phase 2 where you now look for efficacy in the patients. And the third phase is one where you now check to see if that drug, that new drug, is as good as the existing drug or better. And those 2 criteria are important that can lead to approval of that drug eventually by the FDA for patients.
I'd only add that this is going to be one of the longest portions of bringing a drug to market is the clinical research and trials phase. Is because it can take anywhere from 7 to 12 years.
Yes, for sure. And sometimes these medications never do come to market, but there's a lot of time and energy and resources invested into this type of resource. And sometimes, you know, we don't have the successes that we're looking for, but, you know, we have to keep persevering and we need to continue to evolve, you know, medicine evolution. So with successes come failures and vice versa. So.
Great, thank you. Circe, as a patient, what was your experience like taking part in a clinical trial? And was there anything that surprised you about the experience?
Thank you. Good question. I actually really appreciated being invited to participate in a clinical trial. It felt surprising to me that that my opinion on the different stages of it and the different effects of the medication were so wanted. I didn't realize how valuable a patient's experience and side effects and what we've talked about how important that feedback is. And it surprised me how organized it was and how detail oriented it was. And I really overall appreciated it and walked away from my experience wanting to participate more in clinical trials, realizing that the information gathered, even as you mentioned that if it doesn't come to market, that it is valuable for other parts of medications, other parts of research, and that I could be helping not only my patient population, but the patients in general of all different diseases.
Good point. That is a good point.
That is very gratifying to hear because that's the goal of a clinical trial. The patient's perspective is very important. And in fact, to get in the trial, you have to fill out the consent form for the patients. And that consent form has to be so clear that the patient understands the risks and the potential for that trial to say yes or no to the trial. And even before the trial is approved, it has to go through several checks, you know, to make sure that the protocol is correct, you know, by people that have no stake in the trial, but they're looking for the good of the patients. And also to monitor the kind of side effects to the trial that patients have. Because if it gets that bad, they can stop the trial. So the patient is number one when you do a clinical trial.
All right, Kurt, we know that many patients are waiting for treatments and cures for rare diseases, but we don't hear often about the innovation that is taking place for chronic conditions, which impacts many of us and our loved ones. Are there clinical trials underway in Oregon for individuals with chronic conditions?
That's a good question. And yes, there's an abundance of clinical trials currently active in various states in our state of Oregon. And it's really, I think from a patient perspective, it can be frustrating to try to identify where to find these trials that are specific to maybe a therapeutic indication that patient might be experiencing. One of the new platforms out there is the Oregon Alliance of Clinical Researchers. And that particular consortium involves a variety of different independent research clinics around the state of Oregon. It involves OHSU, Legacy Health Systems, and patients can go onto the website at orresearch.com, and there's a resource tab where the patient can choose a drop-down menu that basically it's a search engine for active clinical studies in the state of Oregon. They can search via a specific disease state, age, or a location. So that's a great new tool that's constantly being updated. It can drive the patient straight to the particular study site that is conducting that clinical trial, providing more information to be able to contact and reach out to that particular clinical trial site to learn more about the active study. And in some cases on that particular website, you're going to see new upcoming studies that may be coming to the state of Oregon, you know, within months or within the year. So I would encourage our patient population to check out orresearch.com and look at the search tools.
Okay, great. If you don't mind me
Yeah.
adding, I actually played around with it this morning, just
Okay.
looking at it. And as a patient that with my multiple chronic diseases, it takes a lot of my time and energy just taking the recommendations from the doctors and the medications. And so I don't think there's a lot of motivation or fuel in the tank to kind of go outside of that scope to find clinical trials. But I was so pleasantly surprised that on this website, it was so user-friendly and very clear cut. Within seconds, I was able to find what was nearby in Gresham or in different parts of the state. So it's excellent what you guys have put together.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that feedback.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's actually an awful tool to have. But some patients are not that sophisticated.
Mhm.
So the place to start is the oncologist. Ask them and they should know what's going on. And of course, can refer you to that site. Also, the hospitals in the city, OHSU, Providence, and Legacy, they have databases so that you can go to about the clinical trial that's ongoing in those institutions, that in addition to what you have, so.
Yes. Yes, that's good. That's a good point. So there's multiple ways that you can find clinical trials near you. This question is for Reed. COVID-19 has highlighted many challenges surrounding health equity. Is the industry doing anything to ensure that there's greater diversity in clinical trials?
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm actually going to start a little bit with going back into my personal experience with this, in that I joined pharma in November, and obviously, you know, with all the conversations that have been going on throughout the pandemic, we've had, you know, an opportunity to have more conversations about the need to diversify in several aspects in communities, and have that greater conversations about, you know, how we can take steps to you know, do things that the pharmaceutical industry is investing in terms of having conversations with having conversations like this to help to speak out on the question that was just answered, just how patients can find out more information. Prior to joining the industry, I did not know about many of these great tools that existed. I worked, you know, I had a friend who participated in one of the COVID clinical research trials, and I didn't know how she found out about it. But it worked out well for her, and actually her kids were able to participate in. And so there's absolute value in having access. And prior to my joining pharma, they convened a large conversation with over 500 stakeholders from 150 different organizations across the country to have a conversation about how to better communicate and share information so that patients, so that families can know more about what exists, and quite frankly, to have conversations about how to correct past wrongs. And I think there's been a lot, quite frankly, in popular conversation over the past couple of years about some of those issues. And so those were very insightful conversations that, quite frankly, are still going on today. And as those continue, we're finding new paths, new relationships, new commitments to work through a lot of those issues. And so farmers, you know, invested in improving several different areas, from the communication that we just discussed to data collection, to increasing participation in different ways that you can make that happen. And so a lot of feedback that we've received has been insightful, and as you would imagine, and there's a lot more work to do. And so I was pleased to see that this is moving forward, and was already a big investment by the industry, and our members, quite frankly, have gleaned a lot, and we need to make sure that we are capturing the work that has been done over the last couple of years during the pandemic. Because, you know, look, I'm a public affairs guy, and quite frankly, we have to make sure that we're using and turning this pandemic, the situation we've all lived through, and learn from it and use it as an opportunity to make improvements. And certainly there's been conversations happening in communities about this issue that our members have been very involved in, to ensure that that the clinical trials and other work that we're investing in, that we've heard about, from lupus to other several chronic diseases, are being treated, that are reaching all people. So
That's great. Anyone have anything else to add? Okay. Well, as we can tell just from speaking to the four of you today, there's a variety of people involved in these clinical trials. So Reed, once again, if we're looking at clinical trials from an economic perspective, how does Oregon benefit when these clinical trials are conducted locally in our state?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, it's always about the patient, right? And so it's wonderful to see that in Oregon that we've got such good levels of participation with 9,000 patients currently involved in clinical trials and several hundred active trials happening right now. And so as we heard about. So you know, I think earlier we understand that earlier we heard that there's over $450 million of economic investment happening because of the clinical trials here in Oregon that the state has benefited from. And then if you look at the fact that because we have operations here that are doing this work, from hiring staffers, working with patients, making sure that we're retaining patients throughout the clinical trial process. We're looking at over $6 billion in induced and direct economic benefit.
Okay, so along those same lines, Emmanuel, what types of jobs are generated from clinical trials conducted at sites like yours?
Well, several. I mean, jobs are created. Start with the hospitals. For one thing, they make money to provide resources for the patients, and of course, the development of the drug to the clinic takes a lot of people. You have to have the lab. You have students that can work there. You have scientists that can work there. And when you get the clinical trial stage, you have nurses, you have the doctors, you have the statisticians to make sure that the data look good. So a lot of people are really involved in getting the drug to the clinic and then also conduct the clinical trial. And Oregon stands to benefits. We have evidence of that, both at HSU, at Providence, Cancer Institute, as well as Legacy and even Kaiser. So it brings a lot of resources and jobs opportunities to Oregon.
Do you want to speak for just a moment about the clinical trial that you currently have underway and what's happening with that?
Yes, we're glad to. So our company is Vienna Therapeutics, and our primary focus is breast cancer, both triple-negative breast cancer and HER2 breast cancer. These are very, difficult to treat cancers, unmet need. And our approach is a little bit different because we recognize that a lot of treatments for cancer patients includes chemotherapy. We know chemotherapy is bad. It's been bad for several years, but it's the mainstay, backbone of a lot of clinical trials. And in fact, with immunotherapy, which is a new type of treatment that exploits the immune system, you still need to add this chemo to the patients. Now, quality of life is important because I have personal experience, not me, but family member, as well as friends and colleagues that have gone through cancer, have been treated. But to survive the cancer, some of them do not, but those that survive the cancer have to live with it throughout their lives. And that's where the quality of life is important. So we need to be looking for drugs that are effective and also safer. So not making a picture of what we do, we have an oral drug that we believe is quite safe. And we've done a clinical trial at Providence. We're doing another one now in HER2 breast cancer at Fred Hutch in Seattle. And one of the patients, for example, had cancer coming to the trial, and she's now 17 months in the trial. I mean, her cancer hasn't gone away, but that's stabilized. Mm-hmm. So we have to think about cancer, not just, yes or no. Quality of life is also important. And if you can keep your cancer at bay, as she came in stage 4 metastatic cancer, and she has minimal side effects. I mean, the early side effects, and she's doing very well. The second patient just got enrolled 2 months ago, and she's doing very well in terms of her side effects, which is very important.
Great. So Kurt, what about at your site? What kind of jobs are generated from clinical trials conducted?
Kind of adding on to what Emmanuel had mentioned, we employ doctors and a variety of different types of clinicians and research coordinators and lab coordinators. These are relatively specialized roles within research that all of the clinic settings within the state, have an abundance of these types of resources. And sometimes it's hard to find these resources because they are so specialized. But I think it's vital to the type of research we do. It's interesting through our conversations, one of the most, prevalent and vital components of what we do is the patients. Without the patients, none of us can do what we do. And they're the biggest heroes in the type of work that we do. In some cases, these patients come to us because they've exhausted all other options of treatment that are currently on the market. And in many cases, we can stabilize them, we can change their lives, and their contribution is absolutely vital and necessary for the type of work that we do. So again, without the patients, we can't continue to do the work that we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Circe, as a patient who went through a clinical trial, can you just speak a little bit about your background and your experience and the different individuals that you interacted with throughout your clinical trial? I'm curious from the patient perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. My background, I used to work in business and haven't been able to work for about 10 years now from being so ill. I used to be in and out of hospital constantly between lupus and interstitial lung disease, which I was diagnosed with about 10 years ago as well. And one of the effects of these diseases that has hit me drastically in my life and really changed my quality of life is the chronic pain. And so I was honored to be asked or told about the clinical trial for a pain medication that is a non-opiate, non-controlled medication. And I first interacted with my doctor who let me know about it, and then interacted, I can't remember their titles exactly, but there was somebody from the lab company that followed me along throughout the trial. I would go in, I want to say it was every couple weeks or definitely every month, and report my side effects, how I was doing with my pain levels. And they wanted to know everything, how it affected every area, every body system. And there was also another patient who I met through that it was just really nice to experience kinship of patients with similar symptoms. And we were both doing it, I think I would say, out of desperation for having some relief and some quality of life restored to us. And I believe it lasted 6 months or a year. I've gone through so much medically and so many hospital stays, it's hard to keep all the details straight. But overall, I would highly recommend people participating in the clinical trials. I think that it was a game changer for me, and my health has drastically improved since that point about 6 or 7 years ago. And I can't say enough good things about clinical trials.
Oh, that's great. So how did you get involved with Kaleidoscope Fighting Lupus?
Yeah, great question. When I moved to Oregon about 2.5 years ago from LA, I was looking for some sort of kinship with other patients, with other people that were experiencing these debilitating symptoms. And my mom actually, since I didn't have the energy to go looking for a support group or any clinical trials, my mom helped to find this group. And it's a group of ladies and gentlemen that meet once a month on Zoom now. We used to meet in person, but due to the pandemic, we aren't able to. And the majority of us are immunocompromised, not only from our conditions, but from the medications we take for our conditions. And it has become a source of joy in my month. I really enjoy connecting hearing how everybody's doing. We trade doctor information, medication information. Next month, there's a fundraiser called Tony Starlight. It's like a comedy night, and the proceeds of it go to
That's fun.
good. I'm looking forward to it. I've been invited to attend. It'll be one of the first big events I've been to since the pandemic. So I'm really looking forward to that. And so we have a wonderful moderator. Kaleidoscope Fighting Lupus has some wonderful staff members that help to support us and to provide a safe space for these conversations. And yeah, I'm very grateful for Kaleidoscope Fighting Lupus. And we also have patients a part of it from Idaho and from Seattle. So it's not just Oregon in particular.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
That's great. So as we wrap up the discussion, I just wanted to ask a final question to all of you, but especially Circe. What advice would you give to individuals who may be considering participating in a clinical trial for the first time? And I think each of you has a different perspective that could answer this question. But Circe, let's start with you.
Yeah, I would encourage whoever it is that knows about clinical trials or their community, their patients, the families of the patient. I would encourage them to participate, that you're not only potentially benefiting yourself and finding a cure for your disease or another treatment option for it, but you're also benefiting all patients in the population. Because whether or not the medications come to fruition on the market, the information captured is really vital to further research, further development of medications. And I think it can be very empowering as well as a patient to know that your suffering is not just affecting you, but it's being used for good. It's like a gold lining to a crummy situation of being sick. And the potential for it helping other people, I find very empowering and encouraging. So I would definitely encourage patients to, and encourage everyone to have clinical trials more as an open conversation that we touch on in medicine.
Yeah.
It's not often talked about, and I think it should be.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, so for the patient, they're the heroes, because when you get a clinical trial, everything else doesn't work for you. But they should have faith in the system that, a clinician doesn't start a clinical trial because they just woke up one morning and so let's go treat patients. There's rigor in the process to get a clinical trial. There are checkpoints along the way. That the protocol pays attention to the patients, is well done, the people that review the protocol, every step of the way that clinical trial is ongoing. That if anything goes wrong, they will catch it, they will make sure they change it, or they will stop it. So the patient is always number one. So that's something to have in mind as a patient in the clinical trial.
I would say, from a patient perspective, educate yourself, ask questions, talk to your clinician, talk to your specialist, educate yourself by going online to the OACR website to identify what types of clinical trials are currently active in the state of Oregon. And be patient, because it's a process. Being involved as a patient, this takes time, and results don't happen overnight. This data is collected over a period of time, and there's going to be some highs and lows, but just be patient. But certainly we all have to work together to get to the end goals.
Right. Anything to add?
Just that's exactly right. What's being repeated is that patients are absolutely critical for this process. As we alluded to earlier, only about 12% of what is of the drugs, the medications that come through this process are usually actually approved. And so we need to continue to do research and development. And since I joined pharma, I've had the opportunity to speak with several researchers, and it's really neat to hear their stories and how excited they are to wake up every day and work on behalf of patients. And so we're very proud as manufacturers to continue this investment, and we need to continue to get more people to be a part of this process at all levels, from patients to others throughout the entire system. So it's great to continue these conversations. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. So now we can take questions from the audience, in person and online. Heather, do we have any questions from our Zoom audience?
We have one.
Okay.
How do clinical trials address equity in their research?
How do clinical trials address equity in their
In their
research?
Equity in research, well, you have to have access for you to be in a clinical trial. And access means also knowledge. And a lot of a significant percent of people don't have that information, that access. So because they don't have the knowledge, they don't know of it, so they do not participate in it. And I'll give an example, which is being Black. There was a study in the UK where a student said when they go to the hospital, they say, well, did you turn blue? That's where they look at whether your things are wrong. But when you're dark skinned, you don't see that. So you can't tell. So not only, it's not that you must always have Black doctors treating you, but educates the white doctors of what to look for in a patient. So part of it is access, and also just kind of broadening the scope of individuals that are treated, so can learn more, and not just about color, but even with women, that there are different, issues with women. So we just need to broaden the scope of experts, broaden knowledge, and broaden access for everyone to get the best care.
Mhm.
Yeah, data collection is key, and for that you need participation and communication. And so there's a lot of work to be done in that space. I think that we, as an industry, have acknowledged and are committed to, correcting some of the and improving upon some of the work that has been done in the past. And so I think you pointed out some great areas where the education that needs to take place.
Kurt, can you speak to clinical trials, the collection of data that they take in before they select who might be part of the clinical trials?
That's a long process, and there's a lot of different layers involved in that process. As a research site such as mine, we take in that information and that data is collected typically into a central database, because I may be working on a COVID clinical trial that many other sites around the country or the world are working on collectively. And so all that data is being dumped into a central database. And then there's a variety of different levels of clinicians looking at that data in real time, routinely, daily, weekly, monthly. And they're looking for trends, typically, trends that are positive, trends that are negative, trends that haven't been seen before. And all of that is part of the process of the data collection that is all put together and presented to the FDA when that study is ready to come to market. And so it's very complex and it's very layered. And again, it takes time. Sometimes, we're collecting data for 5 years before we come to any type of conclusion or determination as to whether, that particular compound or medication is going to be presented to the FDA. So hopefully that
Great,
answers your
thank you,
question.
thank you. Anyone in our audience here? Do you have a question? Go ahead, Bill.
The pandemic has made it clear that the treatment of disease and drugs available aren't uniform around the world. So how does the U.S. clinical trial and the drugs that come through it integrate with or compare to what's going on around the rest of the world?
Well, that's a good question. And that's a tough one to answer. I think the only way to answer that is the unity of all of us, whether it's clinical research in the United States or abroad. As clinicians, we're all sharing that information. We're all talking to each other. And when we see trends that may be different from one geographical area to another, I mean, that warrants some attention. And that allows us to determine how we would modify or amend potential aspects of the protocol to adapt to those changes. And but it's communication. It really comes down to unity and communication, whether it's US-based research or in any other part of the world. But it's complex. I think it's a collaboration of a greater good, to try to answer your question.
Let me just add to that, when we talk about the phase of clinical trial, by the time we get to phase 3, we're looking at huge numbers of patients, thousands. And for the most part, those trials are international. So you have different countries participating in those trials. So you engage individuals, institutions outside of the US. Now, one of the issues, maybe we can address this better, is that we're very good at approving drugs in the US. The European Union, for example, their budgets are a little higher. One of them is cost. You can have a drug that's very effective here in the US, but if it's too costly, at least the NHS in the UK and other parts of the Europe will not approve it because of that cost. So that's where some of the differences can arise. But in terms of having the technology available, it's available worldwide because that's what most of these big pharma do. They have the deep pockets to conduct trials all over the world. The question is, if it works, can a patient have access to that drug, for example, say in the UK? And if it's too costly and the government does not subsidize that, they will not approve it. That is some of the issues there.
It's not uncommon to see medications currently approved in the US that are not approved in the UK or vice versa. That's pretty typical.
We have a semi-related question in the chat. The Oregon Health Plan recently submitted a Medicaid 1115 waiver to CMS seeking authority to exclude from coverage drugs approved through the accelerated approval pathway. How might this policy have an impact on R&D in Oregon?
Well, that's a tough question too. I mean, it can affect a lot of different moving parts within the research consortium. We're here to try to, again, as researchers, collect the data and bring viable, safe and effective medications to the human population. But there's a lot of layers that are financially driven, politically driven within those processes, and they're very complex. At the end of the day, it's the patient safety and well-being that we focus on. And that's why you're seeing in the US, you're seeing these UAs being focused on with getting these COVID medications, to market really quick. And there's a positive and negative to that. The positive is we have a pandemic and we need to address the pandemic. The potential negative to that is in clinical research, it takes time and years to collect data to be able to make educated decisions. And so when you're fast tracking a medication to the market, you don't have all that information, and at the end of the day, it's not my decision to make, it's the FDA's decision to make, but we all have to play a role and we have to contribute to the greater good of the human population. So again, those decisions are layered in so many facets of complexity that it's really hard to answer that question.
Yeah. Thank you to Bill Robbie on Zoom for asking.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Should be calling out.
Gordon, you've got a question.
Yeah, a question. Are prescribing physicians treating patients, are they uniformly aware of clinical trials? And if they're not, what needs to be done? And if they are they ordering the right tests that might fit with some of the clinical trials, like genetic sequencing of certain cancer biopsies that may fit a trial, like a HER2 trial? So are the physicians really uniformly aware of all of this and able to use it? Or is there more education needed of the physician?
That's a good question. The answer is no, the physicians are not. And I think that's one of the things that we can do a better job on as clinical researchers in the state of Oregon is to drive information and knowledge and awareness to the medical community. And, we can do that in a lot of different ways. We can do it through the Oregon Association of Clinical Researchers and a multitude of different platforms, but we need to do a better job of that because not every physician out there or practitioner is aware of the type of work that we're doing. It's more prevalent in an environment like OHSU because it's a teaching institution, but when you drive down to the smaller clinics or specialists, it's up to the individual specialist to take on ownership of awareness, and they just don't have the time and the tools. And I think we need to do a better job of giving them and delivering that information, something we're certainly trying to work on.
Yeah, and I'd add that that's absolutely part of the scope of work that is being discussed, right? And in addition to the several other organizations in the community that need to be a part of that.
Any other questions from our audience? Yeah, Senator Lieber.
I feel compelled to say a few things and maybe even to your audience.
Sure.
All right, my name is Kate Lieber. I'm a state senator. Almost 14 years ago, I was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer when I was 42 years old. And I was 42. I had 2 small children at home. I would have, stood on my head in the corner if my doctor would have told me that, right? And so and so I just want to say this. I was actually I was involved in 2 clinical trials. And it is not lost upon me that I stood on the shoulders of the patients who came before me, and that's really the reason I'm here today. And I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you. Thank you for everybody who's in this work. It matters to patients like Cersei and I. We're alive because of it. I did a double mastectomy, 5 months of chemo, 3 months of radiation, 10 years on an AI, the 2 clinical trials and a total hysterectomy. And I am so happy to be here and be able to say in this international clinical trials today, thank you for what you're doing. So that's all I wanted to say. So thank you so much.
Thank you for your participation.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being here today. Any other questions, comments? Online or in person?
We do have a couple online if there are no further.
Okay.
How are the efficacy of clinical trials and the conditions treated presented to educate the public and create awareness? And in addition, how is the data, we talked a little bit about the data, but how is it used to determine eligibility to clinical trials?
I'll start with the last part because any drug that is developed by scientists, no matter how exciting the data are in the laboratory, is an experimental drug. So you must go through a clinical trial because that drug may work based on what you did in the lab, but it may not work. So that is very critical that when a patient goes to a clinical trial, they're aware that this is a drug that has potential. But whether it's going to work, eventually we don't know. And there are several things that can lead to the end of a clinical trial. You do the work in the laboratory, and the test tube works great, but going to patients doesn't work. So you have to stop the trial. Or it's so toxic, the patient cannot continue with the drug. So you have to stop the trial. So those are the kind of things that influence the outcome of the drug that is developed, how far it goes. And of course, if it doesn't work, if you have people that have invested money, biopharma in it, they're going to say, okay, we're going to drop this trial. And that happens all the time. So I think, as you said, about 12% of drugs are approved. The road to that 12% is a very long road. And you have to be persistent, passionate, and patient to get there. But in spite of that, we're approving drugs, not as high as you want, but it's good to know that the good ones really get through and they get to our patients. But not all of them get through. Just the way life is, it doesn't work 100% of the time.
And it's typically the failures are less, I guess, are less exposed to the public. And the successes are more exposed to the public. So there's a lot that happens behind the scenes that the public's not aware of. And that's what we do day in and day out. It's great when we have a success and we see value in safety and efficacy of a new medication. We rely on pharma to help get the message out, in non-biased ways. We can't do it all, as researchers, it's much bigger than us. But certainly, it's everything we do behind the scenes that, it's really making an impact.
I'd say that, and thank you, and certainly our members are very, invested in billions of dollars worth of investments and working through the research and development process. And I would say that, one of the places where you can find out information is the pharma blog post section, where we actually just released a new medicines in development report. I believe it was just yesterday. And so there's information there about work that's happening with blood diseases, and so I find that information fascinating. Certainly, there are other medicines and development reports available online where you can find out more information about that work. So I'd encourage you to go there as well.
I have a question.
As a scientist, I'm excited about innovation and technology. If we look back to 10 years ago, what we're doing now is incredible. You have, gene sequencing, bioinformatics, you have AI, where you can really have data sets. So you can really bring people on trials that will work simply because you've done all the background in terms of the science. So really exciting times, for our patients, that things are moving so quickly. You look at COVID, that is amazing how the mRNA vaccine has saved lives in the short period of time, in the number of patients that went on trials. This is something that's never happened before. They had the faith. So we have to still be positive and excited about the future, because the technology is just getting better, big pharma, research institutions, scientific labs. So, we have to be hopeful and just only get better.
I have
I'd
an
actually like
additional
to
question.
mention, since you mentioned it, Emmanuel, about the vaccine being so life-changing and life-saving during COVID. And also I was approved to participate in I believe it's an FDA emergency use authorization medication. It's called Shield, and it's a monoclonal antibody injections. And so we used to use them in the pandemic once a patient was in a state of death and a really severe illness. And now they figured out with research, even though it's not fully approved yet, that it can help somebody like me who's incredibly immunosuppressed, and that giving it prior to even exposure to COVID can be life-saving as well. They say it's like an internal N95 mask for your body. So it's not even letting the COVID infection lodge at all in my body. So that wasn't a plug for it. I think it's really wonderful, all that we've done throughout the pandemic. It's really inspiring.
Yeah,
You guys do good work.
fascinating. All right, we have time for one more question before we have our final thoughts. Anyone?
Yeah, I do have a,
Online?
hello, can you hear me?
One more question, and then maybe some final thoughts at the end of the question. But regarding its accessibility, is it more known in the university setting, or how do you win the trust of the BIPOC community?
Yeah, I think that in terms of having the conversation about winning trust is, that is exactly what we need to improve upon, and those are the conversations that we've been having. And I think that the steps to be made are actually having these conversations, going into communities of color, so speaking with everyone in the places where they live, and working through, you know, just how to make improvements in this process, making people aware of what is actually available, making sure that the institutions that they rely upon in their daily lives are actually educated on the options and the opportunities that exist. And in terms of, you know, is this more something that's might be more prevalent, that awareness may be more prevalent among you know, the universities, certainly in the work that's being done to improve knowledge base among the doctors themselves, you know, the practitioners. Absolutely. I mean, we're invested in having those in educating, bringing more people into the industry. And so our work with the universities in and of itself, and also investment in STEM education is a part of that process. And so there's definitely a focus on that. And so, yes, universities are you know, there's awareness there that may not be as well captured elsewhere. And so that's part of the dialogue that we need to expand.
Mhm. Well, I would love to hear final thoughts from each of you. Anything else you'd like to share, Emmanuel?
I'd like to say, first of all, that patients are heroes in what we do. And that every researcher, clinician should have that as a mindset. Second of all, to be excited about the future. That the technology innovation is just going to touch your pace. That it's going to get better for our patients and for the society. And also having the conversations about access can only make it better as long as we listen and try to address those issues.
I'm very grateful, as I've said, for clinical trials and for the research that each of you and your organizations are putting into to improving the lives and saving the lives of people with severe illnesses. And I also think that often in our world, we want to see the result and we want to see how it benefits people, but we forget about all the times that are involved in trying and failing and trying again. And I think that that's something that all the labs, the technicians, the clinicians really, they have an incredible amount of patience and an incredible amount of trying and trying again. So as we all should.
And talk to your clinician, talk to your primary care provider, you know, about potential research, you know, that they're aware of. Utilize the, you know, some of the platforms that we talked about as far as a resource to gain information on the current active clinical trials in the state of Oregon. Try to educate yourself. And we'll do a better job of educating the public as well.
Spot on. I mean, look, couldn't be anything that's more important for us as people, right? So we have to have our health and we have to work for it. So thank you.
Yes. And thank you all for being with us today. This is wonderful. This is a great conversation. I appreciate all of your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks to all of you who joined us today. We really appreciate you being here and questions and interest. We really appreciate it. So with that, that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.